Great.
That's all.
All right.
Applause,
Start with the
applause.
podcast. Yeah.
Yeah,
All right,
you know, man.
everybody. Thanks for getting on to the stream today. So I'm Srinath. I'm part of the Manas Foundation Media Committee, and this is our first podcast in the Open Podcast series. We are going to be discussing about decentralized autonomous organizations. So it's a very wide topic. What we're going to try and do today is that have two of our committee members and technologists come and debunk some terms, touch upon various aspects of the technology, the decentralized governance architecture, and also talk about their work, what the foundation has planned, and how they are going to implement all these things. So I would like to kind of introduce you to Saransh. Saransh is a pioneering technologist and is well known in the open source communities. And he is the one who's dealing with blockchain, trying to build up tools for implementing decentralized autonomous organizations. And I have Johnson Chetty in short, or say dearly called Jay. He's in the steering committee of the foundation. He will be the one to overlook the foundation's very own decentralized autonomous organization program called Serenity DAO in short. And he is going to be talking about it in depth and also introduce you to different topics which will have their own podcasts in the future. So, Saransh, let's start off with it, right? Kind of let's debunk the basic terms. What is a decentralized autonomous organization essentially, and what's your work related to it? How do you go about? How do you apply blockchain to implement it in the world today?
So I think debunking the DAO is a pretty like interesting thing actually. Like and when we talk about like when did it all start, so we can actually cover a little bit of history, which is about
Sure.
like how Bitcoin blockchain, which is the first blockchain that got into the adoption, like specifically the crypto or the cypherpunks who adopted it. So what we are sort of like looking towards, or when we look at this technology, it has this baked in governance, right? So the ability to have a bit of the, let's say, like for an example, the miners who are flagging that, hey, they want to run this version of the software. So it's pretty much limited to the idea of like how do you actually run a software, right? And it has this baked in concepts like people could
Right.
like vote in, and so that's the first decentralized autonomous. And a lot like the lot of ideas that are related to decentralized is actually pretty simple. Like if you look at it, the ability to run a software in your local like local environment. So let's not get into too much jargons or related to the development. Basically
Right.
you're basically like how you used to set up in your Microsoft like Windows application, that you click next and there's something that is getting added into your application, then you can host, like click it and run this. And from there you go to the web, where everything was suddenly converged towards web. Like even your Photoshop like went like completely web. So essentially you're basically giving away most of the computing work to a server, or a like to a place where you don't know where things are or what they are sort of executing, or what the code is exactly executing. So DAO is a combined set of like sort of these knowledges that are combined to be able to like that you see. And Bitcoin was one of the biggest and by far the most costliest DAO in the world right now. And
Mhm.
I think, somewhere deep down my heart, I feel like, to be able to provide like Satoshi Nakamoto a good rest in peace,
Okay.
like, yeah, like, this, I mean,
And
something.
hopefully he shows himself up someday.
I don't know about that. Like if he does or not, his work is enough. Like, and I think we shouldn't focus on his identity. But
Right.
the idea is what I was talking about: building something on top of most secure platform, and that's what the idea should be is. And yeah, so that's the term. And when you look at the decentralized aspect and you look at the autonomous aspect, it basically is something that one could, in its own autonomy, its own entirety, like could run and create their own entire concepts of frameworks and rules, and probably have people converge toward it. And they could simply like work around, create their own sort of framework in terms of like anything that could be like a rule or something, and then sort of like signal those rules as sort of a virtue that I mean, a group or a consortium, or it could be an independent set of users, right? Or like
Right.
how how you could see. So that's a more or less idea of first DAO, and then now we see venture-backed DAOs that are essentially like Web3, which is like Anderson Horowitz, uh, like
Bit of
community.
feed. Yeah.
So I believe that this is more like a phase where we are seeing an experimentation, which is actually good and healthy for the industry by and large, because unless you experiment through different means, and
Mhm.
there's a bit of advantage here with the early adopters, that they're getting a lot of airdrops, which is actually a good thing. Like you're sort of distributing value, and I think that's what the phase zero is about. Like a lot of blockchains are essentially promising, and the idea that distribution of wealth, which is kind of like uneven, and so like, hey, like why don't we just get this back towards the user who actually own and who create the content? Like why don't we give it to them? So that's the major focus these days around DAO. And I think in nutshell, these code in code we trust, sort of terminologies getting created where you have
Okay.
this code that basically says that, hey, in the event of something, this is the way it should behave,
Mhm.
and it shouldn't have any fuzzy logic, because it's basically settling down again on a different on a entirely independent protocol that is essentially not controlled by a group. I mean, it's partly controlled by a group of people, but at least there is a code that does smooth transitioning of different states. And what I mean by state is like saying like this, like I believe that there is a painting, and there is a, it's kind of a logical thing, like, I believe if there's a painting in front of me, and if it's yes or it's no. So there's these two different states that we keep talking about. So it's a very out of fuzziness or the subjective, approaches, like how we sort of see ourselves as an organism in the entire world. So it basically removes that, and then you have these set of concepts combined together. And so these new DAOs are essentially about managing anything, like managing your puppy, managing your shop, managing your house or wife, kid, whatever, like you can name of it. And these guys are like managing everything now. And I think that somewhere is an experiment which is pretty good, actually, like which should happen. And yep. So that's the idea of the current DAOs, and there's a lot of experimentation going on in terms of utilizing cryptography, utilizing different kind of schemas, mathematics, economics, and I don't know what not. So to be able to figure out what is the best, but there is no best. What you are looking here is a multiple conglomerate of DAOs, sort of like working together. And I think interoperability is going to be the next big thing. Forget about data, big data,
So
AI.
interoperability between different blockchain networks.
No, interoperability between everything in the world we're talking about
Okay,
now.
got it.
We're not talking about blockchains just right now. And I think that's the biggest term which I could see, or that's the biggest focus right now, because even in the blockchain world also, or even in the non-blockchain world, the data, like as any, if you go and talk to any data scientist, the idea of having a consistent set of data, okay, across multiple verticals is quite hard, right? And that's what blockchain solves as of right now,
Right.
right? And there are other things that needs to be sort of like integrated, right? You need to integrate other data sets, you need to integrate. So it's, if you look at the data, yes.
Mhm.
So but like I believe this advent of DAOs are essentially more about governance in the public infrastructure. And if you look at any white paper or any document these communities are floating, they're essentially talking about the ideas of how do you actually give back to the society, that or the group of individuals who create, essentially, or who are the creator. So it's more about driving the engagement in the attention economy, and then managing their sort of asset, essentially. So that's
Right.
the, yeah.
So I want to kind of engage Jay on this topic. So from as a product manager or somebody in the tech space, how do you see this? And what's your view or what's your definition of DAO? And please go ahead. Yeah.
Thanks, Srinath. My vision or understanding of DAOs is essentially the decentralized autonomous organizations, and my understanding is from history is that societies and communities, tribes writ large over the course of history have consistently organized themselves to create group goals and objectives, whether it's the Vikings who are forming raiding parties, who are saying
Okay.
this is how our strategies work. And if you chart the course of history around how human societies have evolved, yeah, I'm going there. but but see, societies have deeply ingrained philosophies which guide how groups govern themselves, and what kind of semantics are at play, what kind of cultural or social or economic principalities are at play. And we're looking at the advent of a newer system of codified semantics. Like the blockchain, yes, is a not a temporary ledger. It's not a person who will die, who's the leader of the tribe and has to resign due to weird activities, or has to abdicate due to life, um, or death, for that matter. No, the
Okay.
potential of a persistent record of human decisions, group decisions that guide the course of group decisions or of the activity of any such large organization is codifiable. Democracy, complexity in human structures, and I'm going there as well. Complexity in human structures is often governed by structures which yield to hierarchies, and there's
Okay.
always a hierarchy there. Plutarchy, so many, oligarchy, and then like let's not go there. But the point is that these lead to governing structures, and fundamentally, excuse me for that cafe noise. I'm in a bit of a beautiful space, but I will still follow through.
Part of DAO,
Uh,
that's it.
yeah, it's part of it all. It's going to be a dirty DAO, and we've got to accept that humanity is not without its dirt.
Right.
Uh, yeah, so the governing principles behind organizations and organizational policies, the structure of how cooperatives have evolved over time without heroic figures, to form consistent rewards and a supply chain, so to speak, of commands and of values that are proliferating towards a group ideologies. Core values being this primary structure around which groups coalesce, and cultures, cultural pride, all the way to nation states, right? Nation states still align around the core ethos. And so we are looking at DAOs forming or codifying the substance of that, where human agents and automatable agents in this current age are performing proxy actions on behalf of each other. And so that is where value is heading, and this is how value can be captured. Yeah.
Right, great. Okay, so one of the common terms that kind of we discuss in the foundation is financial inclusion, right? And I'm aware that Saransh and Jay, you both are collaborating and touching base with each other frequently because you're working on Serenity program together. So can you tell your views about what does it mean for bringing more people into the financially, inclusive market, and how DAOs can help implement that? If any of you could start, we can probably have a conversation around it.
Saransh, you want to cover that first?
Okay, so I think in the financial markets, you mean to say, right? Like, what kind of financial markets, like, you want? Do you have some
What
specification?
kind of social impact does it going to have for the underserved community? You are an extensive traveler, and you've seen how this parity within the society could kind of impact people, especially during times like pandemic. So, from your experience, what's your view on implementing DAOs to kind of bridge that parity and kind of have a balanced view in the society?
So this is actually part of a DAO, right? So the topic that we're touching, right? And
Right.
like eventually the settlement layer that we keep talking about, which is like Ethereum or like Bitcoin, right? So we're no longer like stuck into the loop of the intermediaries, right? So we're basically bypassing the intermediaries. So think of a
Right.
use case where, like, in like as Johnson was talking about a couple of days ago when we were having this phone call, that
Hmm.
SOS or like helpline in case of, let's say, a climate issue. So
Right.
um, the emergency aid that's like can be served, right? So these kind of specific use cases that are stuck into some kind of a paradoxical loops of this bureaucracy or like management and hierarchies, so that actually gets resolved. And the biggest so far use case is the financial industry itself, and what we are looking as a user owned and governed financial industry, rather than something that is owned and governed by at least. And when people talk about such things that, hey, Bitcoin is run by miners and it's centralized, but the same people, you should go and ask them that, who is the leader of your tribe? and if he can stop the money tomorrow, then you're basically homeless and you don't have money to be able
Right.
to put food on your table. So at least that's not happening with these sort of protocols, because these protocols are essentially born out of human energy and emotion. So if you look at the idea, the one who are creating these protocols, they are people, right, essentially. And these people have emotional sort of background, that is essentially that we've been breached by a trust a lot of times, and now is the time to change, essentially. So these are the social impacts that we can cover. And I think one biggest social impact is the bypassing intermediary. And when we are talking about bypassing intermediary, we're not talking about creating
Parallel.
what, come again?
Parallel economy. No, it's not like that.
It's basically
We are
more
actually in a way of creating parallel economies,
it's
and we
actually
are
more,
boldly asserting that prerogative. We are able to, and we want to. The whole point
I
of
think,
financial inclusion is that
Right.
those who are causing the exclusionist principles are systemic, and the entities are already empowered to stay where they are. Capitalism is causing hierarchies and structure states to hold itself. I mean, I'll let Saransh finish before I get there.
so
Go ahead, Saransh.
yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's
I'm a
the
little
idea.
passionate about these things. Sorry. Sorry.
No,
No,
it's
go
okay.
ahead. Go ahead.
It's yeah. Please go on.
Please go on, Johnson.
Uh, all right, I'll just finish. No, please finish your thought.
So this is what I
Okay.
would, this is what I could add. Like social impact is
All right. So,
yeah.
okay. So, what are the other use cases you've identified? You mentioned about financial inclusion. That's one, and climate crisis is something that you mentioned. Some kind of natural disaster or anything, or emergency time. So, what are the other use cases that can benefit from this kind of governance?
Distribution of wealth is one of the major use case.
Mhm.
Like for an example, right now, like how these technology companies produce content and like own this data through the creator economy. So that's where one of the biggest use case is heading towards. So the ability to have one of the and I think that's how the market shares are going to get defined, and market share. So there is not going to be any market as how we talk. And actually this is going to upset a lot of people in Silicon Valley, but what's actually going to happen is it's going to be community driven approach. So
Right.
like think of it like this, like one token could talk to another token, and the possibility of existing infinite amount of tokens is actually possible, because as long as they're running in this sort of proof of sort of anything that is proved, or like cryptographically, so to speak, in anywhere from anywhere in the world, allows the ability to sort of like reclaim and claim the onus on the ownership, or at least the ownership of the data that the
Right.
anyone holds. So that's something which I'm keen on personally exploring, and I think Johnson and like is also keen on exploring on the same thoughts. So I think climate thing, which he has been researching, and he has more ideas around that, right? So maybe
So, could you weigh in on that, Johnson? Yeah.
Sure. So I still want to talk about financial inclusion essentially, and the idea behind
Okay.
DAOs empowering financial inclusion and causing wealth redistribution mechanisms essentially is two parts in person. Like in the sense that certain markets, capitalistic economies, and even if you look at it from a microeconomic perspective or a macroeconomic perspective, we are looking at value amortization and
Mhm.
funneling of funds to people who have proof of stake, so to speak, in the organization, or residual capital via inheritance. And there is an inequality of wealth. When you talk about redistributing wealth directly via UBI or versus UBF, and something that I'm going to talk about food as well, because universal basic food, I think, might be a more smaller target to actually hit in terms
Okay.
of food security, but even it's on route. It's on like what DAOs enable is that there are 2-3 things that we're looking at right now at Sensor, right? Like we are actually looking at one, formation of decentralized identities, making
Okay,
sure
so
that
Sinsar is like the partner foundation headed by Saransh and Jay. I think Saransh was the one to found it. So yeah, so because you brought in that word, I kind of have to bring in and explain. Yeah.
No worries. Like organizations right now, just labels right now, the way I see it. The point is that we're looking at forming apps that allow for decentralized identities, for one, enabling value creation and establishing routes to direct banking. And
Right.
essentially, when you're talking about micro lending, when you're talking about follow through on loans and trying to assess ecosystem level changes happen over time, over periods where you allow people and to find their way in the world, empowering people with capital will cause a shift in certain small markets. Social experiments just are structured like that. And so, even if we're looking at and talking about people who have got a financial fund, so to speak, that empowers them to, one, either cover a time of disaster or something where they're able to push or be an active part of an ecosystem where they are
Right.
generating income for themselves. Either they have to forage or search for income generating ideas themselves, or they can be part of systems where they are just playing a role, essentially employment versus employment creation. So both of these are still systemic policy based interventions that cause financial inclusion to happen in an ecosystem. And so DAOs can actually enable that. They enable the liquidity to hit people directly and also create markets and sustain them. And
Right.
this is this is the level of thought or deliberation that DAOs can actually bring through. There is so much more to be thought. Like there is so much to be talked about, but like the larger governing goal is that the crypto markets essentially and the rise of decentralized finance has caused the world to look at the amount of capital that is moving from established houses into different spaces. Markets are essentially forming overnight, so to speak. And I'm not talking about speed to create a sensation. It's an organic phenomena that's happening in the world today. And
All right.
uh, maybe this is going to be like, so the quantification of this is like a year and a half ago. The use case for DAOs is that about 2,000 people were managing about roughly 50 million in assets. Okay.
Okay.
Regardless of whatever gains or how that ecosystem moves, what those asset classes are divided into, I'm not worried about.
Okay.
But in the end of November, we had a total of, I think, 6 billion, no, 15 billion in assets managed by 2 million people.
Okay.
So 2 million people. This is something that I mean I'm quoting numbers here, but right now without even having a please follow link. So sorry about that. But the idea is that decentralized finance as a rigid philosophical practice, and not as a philosophically yes, but decentralized finance is actually impacting lives and has the ability to change or challenge traditional ecosystems. That's what's happening in the world today. And so before we jump the gun, we didn't say, okay, this is good, this is the next big bullet to bite. There is a fair amount of deliberation, thought
Right.
process around, what does it mean for DAOs and nonprofits? How do we create impact? How do we visualize it? And how do we create a structured economy that changes the lives of people in the long run, but at least have a route to proficiency? I do believe DAOs are able to empower people and organizations to do that. And I think the cooperatives of the world, in terms of how they function, people led, people governed um, organizations, DAOs are essentially another version of like the blockchain supported governance lighter, because cooperatives are so governance heavy and there is a hurdle there, there's a complexity hurdle there. But DAOs can actually resolve that in multiple ways, and
Right.
it's a provable thing. So it's not like rocket science. It's very easy to have an audit trail around efficacy and proving that these models of economic, so to speak, disruption, but will work and can move towards the greater good of things. So yeah.
Right, great. So I think this is the right time to discuss about Serenity DAO and what are your research with respect to that particular program, and also about MF license, right? How can you tokenize contributors to the creator economy that we're discussing about? So can you elaborate on Serenity program, what it is, and how many partners are there currently? What are you trying to do with them? And of course, where does this technology aspect and the licensing comes in?
Saransh, you want to cover that? Or, or the way I understand it is, let me go first and then Saransh can just.
Okay,
So
we'll
even
have
as
Jay
this,
first. Yeah.
yeah. So even as the Serenity DAO program is being structured out or has some formation around it, there are a lot of things that we are just kind of putting structure around. We have participation from Ardor Analytics. We have some participation from Kisoboka, Africa, which is dealing again with education at a grassroots level. So
And they're going to be having their own podcast presenting their case studies, right, in the coming days.
yeah, so we'll have more clarity around
Right.
those aspects as well. The idea is that these kind of grassroots level of change makers, so to speak. The idea is that DAOs can empower them. And the way I see Serenity DAO right now is that it can be a meaningful ongoing exercise where we are able to create or drive ecosystemic change just by at a grassroots level, and and it's a clear cut route to proficiency in the sense that it's not hard to do that, in the sense that every kid can have a decentralized identity. Or I mean, every kid, I'm saying every human being in this ecosystem of players can have a decentralized identity where their needs, so to speak, can be directly ascertained, or distribution of not direct just funds only, but there can be a what do I say? There are multiple strategies around it, and I haven't really undergone all the primary use cases around which we can drive this change. But the idea is that we can do this, and also the governing principles or the environmental nuances that we will encounter as we go along in trying to establish impact in this particular areas will be governed by a group at large. So that's the thing about DAOs. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so
Um,
that's the ideological core of Serenity program, right? The partner program. And one of the important things that we've been discussing is that MF license, how do you kind of tokenize a contributor? So if you could also shed some light on what's the work that's going on at this time, and how far is the research on that front?
I think what we're talking about, like open source licenses, right? That's what you're
Right,
talking.
that's correct.
So, essentially, this is, I mean, there should be, I think we should start like developing a decentralized GitHub. That's all. Like, then you're basically are able to apply anything as an underlying code that essentially regulates what happens, the code essentially. So, right now, the power is in the hand of GitHub. So,
Right.
and like it's a complex nested system that needs to be built, and I think there is a possibility of such system to be able to probe it back essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And what so far, like for an example, you look at this second exchange that we are building right now could have the
Yep.
ability of like essentially have a piece of code, and the complexity will actually arise when you have these pieces of code coupled together and becomes in sort of like an application. So how do you identify all of that? So that is something that I think there is a breakthrough there right these days. The breakthrough is essentially is that submitting the proof of that execution back to the chains, and
Right.
then you can sort of like divide those proofs back to the execution in such a way that you're able to map them using some sort of like a cryptographical provable database, which should be lightweight.
So
And
to kind of give an idea or background to the viewers, right? So what's Second Exchange and what is Sensor
so
Foundation
Second
doing with it?
Exchange, so Sinsar Foundation actually started with the idea of managing the liabilities of Indian volunteers on behalf of Mullah's Foundation.
Right.
And Sinsar Foundation is the name actually comes from like the two different worlds, merging together essentially. And it's and sort of like sounds like Sansar, and so which represents the world. So it's a
Right.
unification, and the idea is that the managing the liability means that the volunteers who are working here should have ground to cover, to hold on to, and we have a bunch of grant recipients who are working right now, and we are like I don't know if it's wrong, if it's right to say, but we're one India's first like DAO first organization that's sort of managing their operations on based on cryptocurrencies. So by virtue of just managing your operations on cryptocurrency, you become actually DAO first. You don't need to have a DAO as a code to
Right.
be, because you're basically running everything, or at least do a part of your. So that's one of the ideas, and
So you're also solving for funding or compensation for the creators on Second Exchange, right? So could you elaborate on that?
so the idea of Second Exchange is, as you could see, that the distribution of creators of the claiming of their sort of not compens. Let's not call it compensation.
Compensation, right?
I
Right.
think it's more like reward, because all the
Fair
work.
reward. Yeah.
Yeah. So compensation sounds more like you're giving something
It's agreed
in.
upon already. Yeah. Like there
Yeah.
is some negotiation that
Paid,
happened.
paid compensation for your pain.
Yeah, so like it's more like the claiming back their own value, which they kind of like is basically is what they think, or which is very subjective also at the same time. So we're
Right.
basically defining the idea or the product works like this, that you have the ability to map out your content, and through the integration of bunch of other services. And what we call bunch of other services are is like all these existing crypto platforms that are mature enough for frameworks. So we're basically integrating them to kind of like have a visible product that allows that closes the loop of engagement of a community like us right now, for an example. So we are
Right.
a community who's sort of like working on what charity. So what biggest use case we can, social impact, or let's say, so to speak. So Sinsar is sort of like solving these rather charity. Why don't we just focus on product oriented social impact? So think of a use case where Srinath works for like for a news organization, right? Let's say.
Which I am.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not
Right.
imagining you, but I mean,
Right.
I'm like creating a fictional character out of the box.
Right.
You do. That's a great story. But so on the traditional web, you have a website. So you basically claim your website or a namespace on a traditional space, right? And there
Domain.
are
Yeah.
few points that we cover. Like you claim your namespace, you host that using Second Exchange, and you create content, and you basically become uncensorable. You bypass all of these intermediaries, and then you have the ability to connect with the people or network or create communities that are sort of like unstoppable. And the ability to produce this valid content or quality content comes with the value or the contract that are essentially monitoring the, or can be modified with the communities also on the long run. So it's not just one person saying that, hey, this is my artwork, take it, and I auction it. So it's more like a community or a voice backed valuation that's happening. And like, so that's the idea of Second Exchange, and that's the idea of so exchange is essentially like you exchange your information, or you share your information.
Right.
Essentially.
So, I want to kind of touch upon this particular aspect of this research-based implementation of DAOs, right? What are the challenges that you've already assessed, and what are the challenges that you foresee at a research level, at the implementation level? And is awareness a big problem because there's a lot of misunderstandings and probably no understanding at all in this space. A lot of buzzwords are being thrown around on the internet. So, what are the
You
challenges you have experienced so far? What do you foresee?
I think, like, the ability to map out things, complex things into a simpler set of, which is a lot of, communities are doing. So we don't have to like think out of the box. There is already a lot of people. We just have to extend it. So the ability to, like, for an example, right now, the browser, right? The browser that we like gone through and learned how to operate it, right? So, for an example, if you use the similar browser and access the decentralized internet by just going, like, for an example, StreamYard, rather than StreamYard coding and putting this code into a centralized server, you're using decentralized approach. So you have to think from the background of it and the ability to map it out with a traditional interface or the traditional approach. That's all.
Right,
And I think complexities will arise. The complexities needs to be solved in terms of, because for an example, if Srinath, who's a journalist, again, let's going back to the same topic of, like, he owns that domain namespace and where his contracts or his whatever work can be sort of like resolved on, which is kind of like lying on some network here and some network there, and then the ability to map that out in a traditional manner in a browser is something that needs to be done, and that's what we are focusing on. And the interesting thing is the complexity of cryptography can never be like given to a normal user like Srinath, because he doesn't really care. He's more interested in getting his art or his content published, you see.
right,
So what you could do is you could simplify them by producing content that is neutral in terms of, or is for lay people who understand these words, like how it actually works. So I think accessibility is going to be one of the pinpoint in the focus area, that how do we map, and that's how things are actually around. If you look around, no, like, that's how we are building also. Like, we're building with this like name service, which is a meta root. And I think for Srinath, this is going to be very exciting because, like, for an example, Srinath, like, I'm an institution, and I would like to block you. And now this namespace cannot be blocked because Srinath would like to raise his voice about a certain topic because that's
right,
what he likes to do. He doesn't care about money right now at this point, right? But this namespace can now be accessed by anybody in the world, regardless of who blocks it. And then I'm an institution. I'm thinking, oh, okay, this is not good because I am unable to block him. So basically, Srinath has bypassed. But Srinath is a good fellow, right? So Srinath is kind of like going through writing content that promotes people. Like, that's how Oro, like, a lot of people around, like, do
No, if
that,
we
right?
get into self-regulation, that's a different topic altogether. Whether I'm going to regulate myself or not, it's going to put you all in soup if I don't. So let's not get into that topic right now.
It's
So
not
I want,
self-regulation. It's more like being able to voice in, like,
I get
like,
it, yeah.
yeah, as a
So
Can
user.
I want to ask
rights
Jabe from his interaction with the ecosystem. What are the challenges that you've heard from the ecosystem, and what are the challenges that you foresee?
uh,
I think that, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry?
no, but,
Yeah, yeah.
I think
Please, Jay, go
Saransh
on.
was still talking about something like, oh, like finish that line of thought. And I
challenges
think,
in the ecosystem challenges in the ecosystem, I think the idea of like, when we talk about ecosystem, I think people are ready in general, because there was never a system that was basically capable enough of representing some sort of a truth, like whatever it happened, right? Like, let's say the
Right,
good thing or a bad thing, right? So there is actually such a system right now, right, which can actually be point to, right, something in a public, at least partly centralized or whatever, like controlled by a few group of, again, but at least these things can be probed and kind of like, got back. So challenges in the ecosystem, I think, the hard part is training people, and that's what we are doing right now. We are basically spending a lot of time, like, with, like, people, like, let's say, like, different backgrounds, and like training them. And then once they're trained, they're capable enough of understanding how these systems again can get plugged in with the accessible sort of approach. So then you have basically solved a lot of problems. So basically, I think it's more like this. the ability to still create your website, right? Like how easy these days now to create your own website. Earlier, how hard it was. So the same thing, if we could do, like, with the ability for you to access this decentralized internet, how you do right now, like, just go on the online, like think
Correct.
not
Yeah.
about how you
Basically, you're
think.
talking about productization and behavioral change among users to adopt it soon.
That will also be there, but I think people have tried this, by and large, this experiment, and the adoption curves are still slow. So what you do is you basically go on the other side, you plug in with the other thing, and I think that's where the
Right.
key of the crux is.
So start from the integration and then move out,
That's what
diversify.
that's what I keep talking about. Interoperability is going to be the big
Right.
thing.
Get it. Yeah. So Jay, if you have any thoughts on that, please go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, so some of the challenges outright, there are two like strata of challenges the way I see it. One is the systemic level and then the use case driven challenges.
Okay.
The systemic level challenges are, of course, regulation, uncertainty on how effective these principles are, the rapid growth of certain things, but also like what does this mean for effectiveness in the long term? And that at a very systemic level is something that is concerning to multiple agencies and organizations, think tanks. There is disruption that's happening in the financial sphere. DeFi is not a small beast, and so people are talking about it a lot. Silicon Valley is generating enough IP and throwing it away, so to speak.
Right.
That what the traditional world will say, throwing it away. With the
Okay.
traditional world, the traditional world is about closed source, trying to define, okay, we own this capital because we own the people, we own the copyright. And so in these systems, the drive for creating inclusive systems is still there, but there is systemic inertia at that level. But at the other end of the story, there are drivers of change that are still systemically moving forward. And I think valid use cases will establish themselves. Uh, what I mean by that is that defining use cases where governance and policies are able to create certain systems changes, they will stand the test of time because the participants are not the ones who created the policies. Like co-ops, right? Like just understanding co-ops. There are certain co-ops which have been in existence for a long time. The value
Right.
proposition and benefits for them are not an unknown case study. But systemically, these exist. They hold a huge market share of existence. They don't have hero worshippers or hero leaders, but these co-ops are guaranteeing market caps. I think are roughly around 10 to 20% ish in the whole of markets, essentially trying to govern the services or products essentially that are running under the co-op model. Why this is important is at a producer consumer level, at a very basic market level, you do have a reformative thought process that's happening. And Silicon Valley, so to speak, or people the world over, are trying to technologically solve the problem in terms of arbitration, international law, conflict resolution. All of these are things that are tying into like the Rome Convention, right? Like there is so much of legal structure that needs to be adhered to establish the freedom of operations for organizations, and also establish the right of way of freedom for people who are getting value. So
Right.
DAOs are able to, at this juncture, at this point of time, actually codify or create or have a system where these legal requirements and conditions are still being met and can be dealt with, but also still reduce governance overhead.
All
And
right. Yeah.
yeah. So sorry, ecosystemic challenge is still there. Systemic. The use case driven challenges, the second strata of challenges. The use case driven challenges are more nuanced in the sense that when we look at what we're doing at Sansar is product led growth. And that means defining products and services and letting a free market or allowing ourselves to hit or be hit by a free market in its concerns to define how best to actually tackle the needs for organizations around this, whether it's driving change in small ecosystems or small use cases. For that matter, DAOs are usually organized around philosophies. Right? So it's like we were talking about this at Audible right now, which is a good place. Sorry about the noise again, but dirty DAOs, dirty democracy. Yeah, somebody's got to do the dishes, and the dishes are dirty. So
Yeah, get it. All right. So I think we kind of touched upon a lot of terms today and a lot
Right.
of ideas. So I think it's good to call it a day for this podcast today. And I just want to summarize the line of thoughts that we exchange so that anybody who's watching this later on could probably get the gist of the conversation. So we touched upon what DAOs mean, starting from the Bitcoin example that Saransh gave, the value proposition that Jay was talking about, the social impact that it could have, and then different use cases covering financial inclusion, climate crisis, any emergency, addressing emergencies, challenges including interoperability, adoption, encouraging adoption, and at the same time, use case level and ecosystem level inertia that's prevalent in that particular implementation that we are talking about. So, and we also touched upon Serenity program, Serenity DAO program of the foundation, licensing aspect of it, second exchange, the role of Sansar Foundation, and going forth with the projects, and also providing tools for implementing DAOs. I think that's an extensive set of topics we touched upon today, and all these warrant their own podcast, right? So they demand we will be having. And we will be coming back with probably more members and more set of people to discuss as we progress with it. And for now, we are going to end it, but we are going to end it with another flute performance by Saransh. So I think it's yeah.
But I think we should do this more often. Actually, like
Sure.
every
Yeah.
week
Why not?
we could cover like various topics, like, and we could get more people involved into this, like which I think yeah,
So
I think
here's
we
the thing, right? We are operating in open community. So, people who kind of then are not caught up with what's going on probably could get on and chat with their own set of experiences in the community, as well as the projects that they might be working on, especially the developers who usually are in the backstage and they don't come on, and then they don't get the spotlight often. That's what I mean. So we
right,
should be
right, right.
doing this more often. And of course, yeah, let's get on with the performance before we end the
I
call.
think, yeah, like we should do this more often, and we should like have like more sort of like what do you call, like different backgrounds of people, like and different set of technology, and like
Right.
that'll help us. But yeah, I'll try a new piece now, and then what happens is that I'll try to see if that can fix here, like the ending notes.
You have 5 minutes. Kind of will be doing that 60 minutes mark. If you can play for 5 minutes.
Oh yeah, sure. Like five, I can play for like 10 minutes, but like then wait, but they'll not be fitting into this time limit. But no problem. I'll just like give me a sec. I'll start
Okay,
this.
so quickly, I went through the comments on LinkedIn as well as Twitter. On YouTube, I haven't gone through,
Somebody said
and
FIR on a DAO is a good
that
idea
was
to
a good
debate.
idea to debate on. So if you, in 2 minutes, if you can kind of shed any thoughts you might have on that, we can take that up. Apart from that, there aren't many questions or just comments about the session. So anybody interested in taking up FIR on DAO? So
Can I
I
do that?
assume that by FIR it means first information report, the legal criminal stuff.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
anybody wants to shed light on that? Yeah.
Yeah, well, DAOs are criminal essentially, and
It's
no, well,
Dawood, it's not Dao.
Jao. No, but beyond that, no,
No, I said
I
it's
think
Dawood, it's not Dao who's a criminal. So
yeah, you're like we're all getting dowed over here,
yeah,
endowment
we're
fund.
getting Dowed.
No, but I think the first information report, it's like a summary. I don't know. I think the world at writ large is looking at a lot of disruption in terms of who's handling finance. Centralized finance is also facing newer operators. There is disruption happening, but the real thing is like the grassroots level change that DAOs are promising and actually have like there are valid case studies around the globe. People are highly recommended to just have a look at those. In terms of forming DAOs, it's not difficult at all. You can form DAOs in any philosophy around core values, and consortiums or conglomerates have already been formed. Market caps and visuals, they're visible. The way DAOs operate, smart contracts, automated governance, all of these things are very, very visible. Automated governance. And so, first information just says that these things are criminally, uh, you know, uh, causing a lot of waves of disruption. And I think the world definitely needs to see what kind of disruption it is.
All right. So anything from Saransh? If not, we'll proceed with the performance.
Praveen, PS, I don't know like where you're from, but like come on board and share your idea. It's actually pretty nice. Think of
Yep. Welcome
like
to join the foundation
welcome
and
to
its
join the
communication
foundation. You can
channels.
speak.
Yeah.
And I think FIR is actually a very nice idea. Like think of it like this. I think Delhi or most of the services are actually online. So they have this sort of indexing place where we collect these FIRs, put them on Second Exchange, get voices around. If it needs some funding, gets funded done. And then, like you're basically solving off the grid problems for these people.
Right.
Yeah, like there's some multiple opportunities. By the way, for you guys, there's a token called Ryald or something, which Avalanche people are developing with the help of Ava people, and it's a
No, that's
litigation.
another topic itself. How you've been assessing different blockchain networks and what's the current
Yeah.
level of work you've done. So definitely we'll have another conversation
Right.
related to that. Yeah.
Cool. So I think I'll just finish.
With
I
the
think we got
performance. Yeah.
performance, and
So
we
any
can.
other comments, any questions or interaction you require, please put everything on comments on LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube. Somebody from the foundation will definitely respond to it. Yeah.
I think yeah, like and get in touch with us. We're very
Sure.
easy.
Yeah.
Like people.
Yeah. We are just open. We are operating like a DAO anyway. So, you by default you will be added to the community if you say yes.
Cool.
right. Thanks so much, Saransh, for finishing it up with a nice performance. And I think we are exactly on time, 16 minutes as planned. So thanks a lot, both of you, Johnson and Saransh. We'll get on and meet you again, once again, in another podcast. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you, Srinath, for your time. Thank you, Jay.
No problem. Yeah.
Jay is a good friend of all of us, and and so Srinath, you're also on a journey of like having this sort of same line on the same thought. So I think thank you very much for getting us together, actually.
No
And it's a
problem.
very
Yeah.
well-informed session. I hope we were able to provide to the community. Thank you very much
Yep.
for your efforts and time.
Sure. Then. Okay, I'm going to end that broadcast now.
Just a few final words before that.
Sure,
Thank you
sure,
for
man.
listening. We might be a little jargon heavy in the start, but I think that's par for the course in terms of where
Having
the world
more
is headed.
podcasts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But thank you.
Yeah, we'll try to have separate podcasts for every jargon that we put out during this conversation, and try and explain them in detail with examples and data, most importantly, going forward. So it's a long process and long journey, so we'll take it slow. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Amazing. Thanks a lot for your time.